Today, I'm going to talk about a book that I read a few years ago, actually, but it was a really good whodunit written by a second generation American. In other words, her father moved to, or her parents, but her father moved to America from Japan. So she's a Japanese person, or well, really, her parents were Japanese. I think she was born in America, so she's an American citizen of Japanese parents. So and it's quite an interesting book. You know, she writes in English, and her book has actually been translated into Japanese. But anyway, I guess I mean, that's the starter question. Really, is where have Japanese people emigrated? Left Japan and gone to other countries to set up a new life. I think famously there was America before the Second World War. I think since the Second World War, it kind of dried up, really. And also to Brazil. There's a lot of Japanese immigrants in Brazil and South America, as my understanding. I think there hasn't been mass migration, large numbers of people moving from Japan since the Second World War. I think there was a lot in the 19th century because of well, basically poverty. No money in Japan. People needed to get out. Luckily, in the last 50 or more years, Japan's been a pretty successful country. So there's not been a strong reason for people to leave. Anyway, I find that kind of interesting. And that's one of the themes of this book. And it's a whodunit. A whodunit is a murder mystery. But it's quite interesting because of the characters. The main character in it is a completely Japanese man who survives the bombing in Hiroshima and moves to America. That's the story. It's based loosely on the true story of the author's father. So there's a lot of reality there. She's writing about experiences that she has. But it's quite interesting to see a Japanese person as a minority in a majority English-speaking country. And he's an interesting character because he can speak English and he can speak Japanese, but he's forgotten most of his Japanese and he only ever learned a little bit of English. So he's a very, and I've said in this lesson, he's a speaks monosyllabic broken English. Monosyllabic means one syllable. A syllable is the sound. So like very short words. He'll say yes, no, ma, maybe, okay. That kind of level of English speaking. Some people criticized her as like, oh, that's a disrespectful way to treat people. But she said, well, I was writing about my father. That's how he used to speak. So anyway, and in this story, he's a gardener. As a lot of Japanese who moved to America, if they had no skills and couldn't speak much English, a lot of them became gardeners in California or working in agriculture, farming. It's the one thing they could do. Tough life. But he became, anyway, in this story, the hero is called Mas Arai, like Masu, I guess, but it's spelled M-A-S, Mas Arai. And he becomes like an amateur sleuth, amateur detective, like an unpaid detective who solves mysteries. But his life is interesting because he spent time in an internment camp. The internment camps were prison camps that in the Second World War, in America, the Americans locked up a lot of Japanese immigrants, even though they were legal American citizens. They were locked up and put in prison just because they were Japanese. Very shameful. And a lot of the reason was because the white farmers wanted to take their land, I think. But she touches on that issue, but not too heavily in the book, and it's an enjoyable story. This old man who solves mysteries, even though he can barely speak the language, and it's a very good book. I enjoyed it because I listened to it, an audio book read by a Japanese American, I think, called Brian Mishi. So I'm assuming he's a Japanese American. He was very good, and his Japanese, some Japanese words would be pronounced well. So I thought, oh, he probably knows what he's talking about. Anyway, I recommend this book, and I think you can get this book in Japanese. It's called Strawberry Yellow by Naomi Hirahara. I have actually interviewed Naomi Hirahara on a blog. Um, I'll I'll give you the link if you get in touch with me. Um, and she's quite an interesting person. So, right, okay, I've got three questions for you. Number one, what makes a good detective story? Number two, would you like to live abroad in a community of Japanese in a non-Japanese country? Number three, do you know any foreign communities living in Japan? Of course, I'm a foreigner living in Japan. I'm not sure I live in a community of English teachers. Not really. Do you know any where there's a strong community of foreigners? Maybe Chinese, Korean? I don't know. Filipino? I'm curious. Okay, thank you very much. See you next time.